Our documentary is about blacksmithing and carpentry. We thought this topic would be interesting to discuss, seeing as not many people know about them, and many people regard them as dying arts. In this documentary, we're going to discuss whether they really are dying out. We met up with a blacksmith called Jude Berry, who specialises in pattern welded jewellery, and we wanted to get his opinion on creative subjects being cut inside schools. What is your opinion on the toll technologies and industrial methods progressing have had on blacksmithing as a career?
There's still a lot of interest in bespoke work, one-offs, individual unique pieces, all the sort of custom work that you'd imagine. But obviously the mass production has gone out from but that happened back in the Industrial Revolution. I think in terms of history, it's nice, it's useful to know about the progression of technology, and certainly blacksmithing. We've got close to 3,000 years of technology that's really been primarily developed by the blacksmith, and so losing that, we lose a lot of understanding of how far we've come and where we've come from. As society becomes more disconnected, more plugged into their phones and other things, there is a sort of counter swing to older ways of doing things. There's a counterculture that's come about where people want to become more connected to the past and to the world, and a big part of that is things like the old crafts. So I think there's actually a resurgence of development of these sorts of things.
What is your opinion of schools across the country cutting creative subjects to make way for academic subjects?
I think it's crazy. I think it's one of the worst things to happen to the education system. The art of blacksmithing and these sorts of things are just integrally linked to the development of science and scientific understanding. I mean, we wouldn't have things like Planck's constant without Max Planck staring at a bit of steel as it's being heated up to understand the workings of atoms that led us to a greater understanding of quantum physics. It's completely pivotal, and it's the practical crafts are a great way of engaging with scientific understanding. You take one away, and I think it's crippling. It's crippling for creativity, and I think it's crippling for real access to valuable knowledge.
We sent out a questionnaire to people of our age group, and a surprising amount of people came back saying that they didn't want to learn a new hobby/skill, and gave reasons such as, "I find the idea of complacently creating something very daunting and prefer to stick to what I know and I can do. And also, it's a waste of time." What do you think to these responses?
I don't think it's up to me to decide whether or not it's a waste of someone's time. There are lots of people that, I think it's a very, very common human thing for people to be faced with something new, and because they aren't necessarily going to be brilliant at it first time round, they abandon it. I think it becomes problematic over time. Technology is becoming more and more intuitive, more and more easy to pick up, and less challenging. Even modern, if you're doing computer-aided design, the software it might as well be an iPhone application. Incredibly easy stuff. But there have got to be people, actually innovating rather than just hopscotching along. And I think it's the death of that.
We also interviewed Richard Balaam, who's a local chainsaw artist, and he also showed us some of his artwork.
My name is Richard Balaam. I'm a professional chainsaw artist, born and bred in Somerset, and I've moved up to Hertfordshire to push on with my small business. Carving for 6 years now. I was very lucky. I had a good friend of mine that I knew from school. He's an internationally renowned artist. He's been carving for several years and just offered me a job one day.
What do you use for inspiration for your artwork?
All sorts really. Like a lot of my abstract stuff, when I see shapes and things like that I particularly like or would like to see in wood, I think. There's obviously things people expect chainsaw carvers to do as well, so like the owls and the animals and things like that, that's also something that's good.
What has been the most difficult part of having this as a career?
Just setting up my own business really. It's the creating essentially a brand.
Where do you source your materials?
I get a lot of my timber from Ashridge National Trust site, which is literally just around the corner.
The issue we're trying to bring to light is that arts such as blacksmithing, carpentry and glass blowing are slowly being forgotten and they're being taken over by industrial methods. What are your thoughts on this issue?
It's very interesting. I remember when I was at school, a lot of teachers would say that we need to get a proper job, to have a recognised job. So something like this is probably a lot harder to get into. I was very lucky, as I said. I had a friend.
Over the years of doing chainsaw art, have you seen an increase or decrease in the amount of interest people have shown towards your work?
Huge increase. As I said, there's not a lot of us doing it. A lot of people see it and think that it's just unbelievable because they can't necessarily get their heads around it. But yeah, it's one of those things. You get the right tools for the job and practice and work hard.
For part of our research, we sent out questionnaires to people of our age group and a couple of teachers as well. And when we sent out the questionnaire to our age group, a surprising amount of people came back saying that they didn't want to learn a new hobby/skill. The reasons they gave were, I find the idea of complacently creating something very daunting and prefer to stick to what I know, and it's a waste of time. What do you think to these responses?
At the end of the day, you need to apply yourself, and you can make of your life whatever you want to make of it, I suppose for some people, it's not easy to get into certain lines of work like this. I mean, for example, my tools are quite expensive, but I've built that up, so it's funny, I hear a lot of people that say, I can't get work, and it's like, well, how hard have you tried? You need to apply yourself and push yourself.
After talking to these experts, I decided to have a go. I'll be making a copper rose and I'll be talking through the process as we go along. So this is the copper pipe I'm going to be using. I'm going to cut it up into sections. As you see, I'm going to mark now. About 4 centimetres per section. So then I can cut it out into little round strips and then flatten them out after I've split them. So the tool I'm using here is an angle grinder with a cut-off wheel, and it makes pretty quick work of the copper because the copper's fairly soft. So after I've cut out these 4 bits, I'm going to put it into my bench vise like you see here and cut it down the middle so I can put it on the horn of my anvil and slowly spread it apart by hitting it with a hammer. So as you can see, it's got splits in the side. I'm going to put it on the horn of the anvil and basically spread it apart so I can flatten it into square sheets of copper. I'm flattening out here using the edge of the anvil, so then on these blank pieces of copper I can draw the shape of the petal. you saw before, there were 4 sections. One of them's going to become the leaf part, and the other 3 are going to become the petals. You can see I'm drilling through all of the pieces. All 4 of them are going to have the hole in the middle, which I'm going to draw the shape around. This is because I'm going to put it on a piece of round stock to create the stem. Here I'm just drawing the shape on in Sharpie, which will come off later when I start polishing them. This piece is the leaf that goes on the bottom, so this is the first piece that's going to go onto the brass. Here again I'm just using the angle grinder and cutting off the excess, so I can start shaping them on the belt sander and the disc sander behind. I've just flipped it over so I can cut the other side now, so I can get a little bit more, accuracy when I use the belt sander. So now you can see I've gone back to the anvil and I'm using a smaller hammer just to flatten out the sides a bit. You'll see in a minute that I show how much thinner it goes after you've actually started beating it. While I'm doing this, it gets quite hard because the grains in the copper get closer together. You can see here, you can see how much thicker it is on the other side that I haven't started hammering yet. So I'm going to do this to both sides. And then here I'm using the other side of the hammer. It's called a cross-peen hammer because there's a flat side and there's a pointed side, so that gives a bit of texture to the petal to make it look a bit more realistic. As you can see, there's the hammer marks there. And then, as I said, because it gets hard, I need to heat it up with a blowtorch and then quench it in water. And that will make it a lot more soft, so I can work it a lot more easily. I'm about to press it on the anvil and you can see it's a lot more soft than before. So here, to get all the black soot off, I need to polish it with metal polish and brass wool, and it gives it a really nice finish, so you can then start actually working on assembling the rows. If you try this, you'll find that actually polishing is probably the longest part. The hammer forming is relatively easy, but getting into all those edges and everything, it's quite difficult with the brass wool. Here I'm forging the stem, so just putting marks in there. Doing this just gives it a bit more texture, so you can see it looks a bit more like a actual rose stem. I'm just cleaning off some of the rust that was on the anvil. And then after this point I can start actually assembling the petals. So first I put on the leaves at the bottom, and I'm going to solder that on. So I've got a bit of lead solder in my blowtorch and I put on a bit of flux there, so that's to stop oxidation forming basically, so it doesn't make the copper go green. So that stays in place, and that's a really solid lock. I had to cool it down a bit because obviously I heated it up with a blowtorch, and after this point I need to work on it with my hands. So I'm putting on the first petal here, and it needs to be a tight fit, it can't be loose, otherwise if you're handling the rose when it's fully formed, it will rattle around and it won't sound very solid basically. So then the second petal, and then the third petal's going on here. The bit of brass at the top was a bit too long, so I just cut down the middle so I could start forming it over, and it creates a mechanical lock because the metal mushrooms over to create a lock between the copper and the bottom solder bit. So then I just pretty much start bending around the petals from here to create that rose shape, and then you get all the different layers. And then I'm just using pliers to do that and vice grips. Fairly soon you'll see the rose starting to form. As you can see, the middle bit is already pretty much done, and then you just need to fold in the outside layers. This is the finished rose. I'm quite pleased with it, but there's definitely some improvements that I can make. Partially the soldering bit, that could have been done a bit better, and I think I'll go with 4 leaves at the bottom rather than 2 next time. After talking to some experts and having tried it out myself, hopefully you can see that with the right mindset and the right equipment, you can try this out too.